Chancho pardo dani kyabsunche dake shinso gibe chonam dola penjire sanye do parasho simchen tamche dewa tang dewe yu tang dembarak simchen tamche dungal tang dungal gi yu tang tawarak simchen tamche dungal mebe dewa tang mindawarak simchen tamche nyirin chadang nidang tawe tang nyamla nebara gyuruchi simchen tamche dewa tang dewe gyu tang dembara gyuchi simchen tam dungal tang dungal gi gyu tang tawara gyuchi simchen tam dungal mebe dewa tang mindawar simchen tamche nyirin chadang nidang tawe tang nyamla nebara gyuruchi simchen tamche dewa dewe gyu tang dembara gyuchi simchen tamche dungal Dungal gi gyudang tawara gyuji simjendam dungal mebe dewa tam mindawa simjendam je nyeri chadang nidang taw dang nyamla nebara gyuruji simjendam je dewa dewe gyudang dembara gyuji simjendam je dungal gi gyudang tawara gyuji simjendam dungal mebe dewa tam mindawa gyuji simjendam nyeri chadang nidang taw Nyamla nebara gyuruji sajbe oeji juji me dota rero linji nyelde yembandi sange jendo Medemboy, Jogenanda, Jela Chebarashu, Idamanguru Renamendala Kaniatayami.
Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. This ground, spread with incense, adorned with strewn flowers, Mount Meru, the 4 continents, the sun, and the moon, I imagine as a Buddha land, and by offering it to you, may all living beings enjoy this pure land. Thus, meeting the teaching of the peerless teacher is due to the spiritual mentor's kindness. I dedicate this virtue for all living beings to be cared for by excellent spiritual friends. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryata Yami.
Kongi dojengi dongwa tawa tamje pambe chire tambe chuni tunje be kodam te la cha za lo. Ya da. Yundu jona ji. Kunonde jemben janju ki sem ki singwa cha wa de pemin se ke chembores. De thone ta ngazo ji karso re. 신디 친이기 돈다 두야 오늘 디스 통통 지나라 그저 투버지 아니 전주 게다 셔럽기 리우데 그저 툭툭지 다배 지단에 타버려 마존데 지시 뉴야지 자마레 이나 소설로 좀 제다 저러서 저러시래 그저 툭툭지 아니 세세주에게 탑시적인 인스
Diane, are you muted?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. So as always, in the beginning, we start out by first embracing the perfect motivation, the motivation of bodhicitta. And that is very, very important. And it is from within that motivation that we now proceed. And this will see to us making this time a very meaningful accomplishment. We can really accomplish something very meaningful when we first start out with the perfect motivation. And so now here, especially now as we continue our study of the way of the Bodhisattva and entering into this 9th chapter, the chapter on wisdom, that Geshe-la now says he will go forth and do his very best to teach and give commentary on this chapter.
사회 우리 시럽기 류티하고 뽑아서가 요 말다스러와 스스로 좀 저게 강시바데 세세주야게 말마다 타쳐버진 디레즈라비아 배 시럽기 류 레라보 균이요 말에 된디인데가라 아니 수수이나 중장달로 가서 툭툭대 더니 이 시바적와도 배 미스게 침보래.
And it's not, Geshe-la says, it's not that I have like great confidence in my ability alone to instruct you in this chapter, on this very profound chapter. But along with these teachings, then actually you yourselves should study the content of this chapter through other books and other commentaries, and do some reading on the side. And even with that, chapter 9 is not easy. But what will make it easier as we go along, if you all yourselves as well look to the other books that are dedicated to explaining this chapter in detail, and then really spend some time with some analysis yourselves in trying to understand all of these, the points that we will be coming to. And this is really very, very important. So along with our Sunday study and learning and instruction, then please yourselves continue on the side to read and reflect and to analyze these points.
자, 시럽다 동리도베 시럽 유래 깨발라 동리를 좀 지지니 과야보지 차발라 수수 다 배자 중상부제 로거래 삼로당 거래 대 리베 geb센도도 삼로당 거래 대등 염도 수남사 거래 초상 립장제대 쉬우지게 침보래.
And for the wisdom that realizes emptiness to arise in your mind stream, then you must actually have the perfect perception of emptiness, just as it should be. Really have a perfect direct perception. And this leads to the wisdom that arises when one perceives emptiness. And in order to have that perfect wisdom arise, then you must depend and rely on other good sources of information on how to have this wisdom arise. And this means other authentic scriptures and other good explanations and commentaries, and read them and then really think about it. Think about the reasoning that is laid out there and the points. And so this is the way that we can come to understand the proper way to apply ourselves, so that the wisdom that realizes emptiness, so that we can accomplish that, so that we can actually attain that. And so while we're consulting these other books and really immersing ourselves in this subject, we're learning the subject, but we're also, this is an accumulation of merit, and also we will be purifying the obscuration. So this is a process that actually will accomplish many things. We will learn, we will accumulate merit, and we will purify obscurations.
다 그산 지가 bet이 코란 세부 통도 왔어. 그저 돈이 지야데 시고에 고바 터두데 맞아 둥알 용사게 다 지자다 부지데 토메 마리 바레 토메 마리 왕기 녀몽게 랭암 바사인자 랭암베 원은 맞아 둥알데 중국어와 디 랭암바데 도잡 마리 바테 지자 토메 마리 발도야게 탑실 순스샤 교인디가라 다 돈이 하마고나 데 메어서에 그 탑람선다 균이 메서래 제상 코 탁고지나 깔리 겹고바 첨부지 두야 된다 맞아 깔리 겹고도 15진 내 첨부 차고도 왔어.
And so before, there was that quote that came from Aryadeva in the 400.
Sonam chungu chundila tesum tsayang zami gyurse sonam sakwazre zagwade tegi jugwade tere sonam chungu chundila tesum tsayang chundila tongbangila tesum tsamje zagmares kalse tesum zawayina sipar supul dobar gyurse tape korba tamje lodogre meazo tugres jazante 태좀 제자는 때리지 파기 머리발에 견개게나 땅문에 서서 하거나 때리장 배 낭줄되는 매바내지 통해이나 때리장 자랑 계획 탑람 코너에 매 작으러 와 뺏게 전부도 와 고바데 때리.
And so there was that quote from Aryadeva in the 400 verses on the middle way, and excuse me, and it speaks to the fact that actually we need to understand emptiness. We need to understand emptiness, and we need to realize emptiness. And through realizing emptiness, actually, this is the way for us to turn back the ignorance that we have had since time without beginning. This ignorance that then leads to negative emotional states, that then leads to karmas and actions accumulated out of those negative states. And this karma is negative karma that leads to suffering. So we must turn back ignorance. We must obliterate this ignorance. And so this quote spoke to understanding, coming to the point to be able to investigate and understand emptiness, where it says, those with little merit do not cast even a doubt. And so this doubt, this suspicion or hesitation that we have about our situation, about our appearances, about looking further into that which we experience. Without merit, we will never question things. So we will never even look into the topic of emptiness. it takes merit to be able to even question samsara. And further on it says, entertaining just a speck of doubt tears to tatters the whole of worldly existence. And so actually it's seeing through appearances and seeing the true abiding nature of appearances that actually tears samsara to bits. And this won't happen if we don't understand emptiness. And so therefore we cast doubt or suspicion upon mere appearances, and we come to understand emptiness. In this way, we then cut ignorance and turn back all of the suffering along with it. This is the biggest aim or objective that we have. It is a tremendous thing to see, and therefore we must put forth tremendous effort to realize emptiness. And realization of emptiness is what will tear samsara apart. And how do we do that? Realizing emptiness, it's actually then cyclic existence or samsara will be ended when we see emptiness. And all of this comes first from our being skeptical about our current situation and investigating further.
다 코르왈레 돌려야지 머리 발리 코르왈레 돌저는 다 다르도나 머리 비켄지베 랭용기 제데 아니베 레드 뇽몬 제베 아니 타바투 제디 조 숨고어와 인규란다 디 갭텐저는 공부르르 데순도 우마린진 타웨나라 자와셔르나라 자와셔르 자시 자시나 레당 뇽몬 제베 타르스 레당 뇽몬 남도레스 대다 줄리 줄바니 동반이 긴가버 규르제 송도 제자 가르송거 되다 탈방 아주도 답에 탈바스디가랑 아주세네 리베 다 주루 점바에 셰기어데 탈바스데 네다 네존지 찔런로야 유바스 셰기도 텐데 마레라레 탈바스인데 나랑주 심규라 타르본로야 마레 심규 상데 레뇽기 제소나 레뇽이 칭월 돌바이나 티 탈바르스 레당뇨모 제베타르스 다 딘라베 간데세 제그르자 레뇽이 다타 헤기 유드숭고레 레당뇨모 남토레스기도 똑바타 나란조 레당뇨모 싱데 간데스케르잖아 애니베 수지마이비 이치게 남토스 순지마이바 나란조 남도 마부 쳬르기도 세미나라 오 테치는 테메오 수지마이비 이치기다 로다네 드베즈샤게 남도드레시 티기다 애니베 남도 망부키 그네 애니 뇽몽게 레키 거와 레사 거와 레왕게 동알사 거와 어때다왜 남도데 까거레스 남도디 용사데 까르르나 레당 뇽모 제베터 레당 뇽모 남도레스 레당 뇽모 남도리 키바레스 수지마이비 이치게 남도 라브레테 Tinoe namtoda karyorana, any Juba Denzin Chures. Chesa Denzin Kalata, Sungi Mena, Denzin Katuya Konayomarwa. Was a Yulgun sutu to you and Nawanajin Zinza, Tele Denzin Lagore. Tongi de Yulin Nana Jinji Yomarta, Sidugala Yulin, now to the Nitsumitume She on the Gala. Tap Nits now to the She Dudoa. 동반이 맞아 나우스도 시거래. 제가 나우스도 시기나 대지 공도 시에나지 대왕기 중에 마리바드 케도도 마리바드 케 간제 데메토베 셰랍데당 데므르데메 덴지니 미바치도 미네 진당벳 무슨 걸와 차디로 뺑옹갈 딘데 코 Ranjin Mepa, Yungun Mepa, Ranj, Sutu Motubashi, Nepanya on Tugala, Yungun Yoba, then Naya the Shidua, Yungun Nandagangasope, Sulamatevaji, Sutu the Nangan the Shigori. Tishi not the Renzin, they can't do. Oh, Drapa Renzin she done Tony Mother Jenda, Uni Yo Marisung Sungor, Chujenda.
La Tamadela.
Tombani to be Sheramato, Zenda to be Zinzia, get Tablam Zenda, Gunio Mares. They depend Missive and Nagachimbuchak to us. Cheza, Zigabeti, take a like Cathan Gumbulu to the Nimba Gimness. Do you do some Tangortaki? Pay, Chimbore.
And so in the root verses of the Middle Way, then there is a quote that really brings some very important, essential meaning. And so this was by Nagarjuna in the root verses of the Middle Way, where he says, liberation. So speaking about, we speak about being liberated from samsara, as we were just speaking about the realization of emptiness, tearing to tatters, the whole of our, samsara. And so we speak about being liberated from cyclic existence or samsara, attaining liberation. What exactly does this mean? And here in the root verses of Middle Way, Master Nagarjuna says, liberation is the exhaustion of karma and the afflictions. The perpetuation of proliferating elaborations that come from karma, the afflictions, and mental concepts ceases by the realization of emptiness. And so in our mind stream, we have, in some spiritual systems and beliefs, liberation is sometimes thought to be another place, another geographical place of existence. But actually, that's not what what liberation is. Liberation is a state of the mind. It is a state that we assume and achieve in our own mind stream. And just like it says in this quote, liberation is the exhaustion of karma and the afflictions and the perpetuation of proliferating elaborations. And all of this happens within the mind stream. And then it says that this ceases from the realization of emptiness. So what ceases? What actually is exhausted when we achieve liberation? Well, just like it says here, karma and the afflictions, the proliferating elaborations that come from karma and the afflictions and mental concepts. So all of this ceases by the realization of emptiness. And here it says the exhaustion of karma and the afflictions. And in particular, what karma is exhausted is the karma that is accumulated through misperceiving reality, through perceiving things in a deluded way. And because we see things in misperceive the reality of things, it is therefore that we have a lot of thoughts, arising thoughts, conceptual thinking, negative emotions. Negative emotions, because of our approach of the way of seeing things in a deluded way, we have all kinds of arising thoughts that lead us to emotional states in our mind. Out of these emotional reactions, We create karmas, and basically so we accumulate karmas, but really what we're accumulating is suffering. We accumulate suffering through this proliferation of conceptualization that is based in misperception of reality. And so what it is actually that is exhausted are these karmas and the afflictions. So all these arising, this conceptual thinking based in misperception, all of this ceases. So as it says here, the perpetuation of proliferating elaborations that come from karma, afflictions, and mental concepts cease by the realization of emptiness. And so all of this, we actually cannot come to the point of eradicating clinging to a true and substantial reality until and unless we have a direct perception of emptiness. Because until that time, we will see outer appearances and we will fixate to them in the way that they appear to us. It is only when we see the lack of intrinsic existence in these appearances that we will see there is a discrepancy there, and the discrepancy will be ended. And so what it is that needs to be cut off and brought to an end is seeing appearances and taking appearances to be just what they appear to be. That's what needs to be eliminated. And in order to eliminate that, we have to eliminate the ignorance that this misperception is based in. And so we learn about the lack of intrinsic existence. When we see the lack of intrinsic existence in appearances and objects, in appearances and entities, then this will block, then the arising of them as real and actual, it just stops. It's a preventative measure. When we see emptiness, this prevents those from ever appearing to us in that way. And so what is destroyed by the realization of emptiness is a realness, an absolute substantial realness in objects is destroyed. It's shattered. We no longer cling to things as true and real. This all ends when we have seen the emptiness. We have seen through them and we have the wisdom of emptiness. It is only the wisdom of emptiness. It is the only method, skillful method to be able to cut off this misperception. It's the only thing that will do it, is the realization of emptiness. And so this is something that is like an indispensable part of the path.
다 중대ppe 미스베게 전부 차바래. 답에 즉 시분 있는 가 전부도 와. 다 디게 가르땡기래 가르통 거래잖아. 아주 낭나신지 짐바이나 낭술터도 여반 짐바이나 코로와 코레아게 차산티니 숭고도 와. 다 낭술나신지 낭술데 까네 낭술나신지 매아진 내사데 때니요 봐. 때닌 중와. 애니 찔리 찌댕이 바티 띠온데 다도 땡중부터 다데 차링고도 와. 차르고 와. 어때 인디가라 다디 중데다 데미존이 차르 동이시야기 탑람겔 데미존이 차바라. 이나 대지부기 펜토그런자는 또 대지부 말도 송니조예가 리바강가 하고 걸어. 이 중심다 시고에다 오니 통야데 강갈 들은 용그러
Mhm.
배 미스베 개첨버리 용배 개첨부 차들이 우마지기가 비치 때당 자와셔라 비치 니가 배 미스베 개첨부 차버래.
Mhm. And so to bring about the understanding, the understanding of the reasonings that bring us to be able to have that direct perception, then we rely on such profound scriptures as we have here in this 9th chapter on the way of the Bodhisattva. And what we learn a very incredibly essential point, and that is that we should not cling to things in the way that they appear to us. If we cling to things in their mere appearances, this is what keeps us circling in samsara. It's the way it is fixating to the way that things appear that binds us to samsaric existence. And so it is this very thing that we must cease, we must bring to an end. And in order to do that, we understand that objects appear, but they only appear in an interdependently originated status. They are interdependently originated and relative, appear in a relative, from a relative process. There is no real absolute truth in them. They are interdependently originated. And so what this means, this means emptiness. This brings us to the fact that they do not have any intrinsic existence from their own side. And we back that up with understanding that they have come into they arise due to an interdependent origination. And so this text teaches us that point, but that's not the only point. That is the underlying understanding of what we mean by emptiness. But there are many other approaches and reasonings that we look at in this text and in other texts that as we go along and study this subject, many other scriptural supports will come in to help us really gain an understanding, just like as within the Aryadeva's quote here and the quote from Master Nagarjuna. So we'll access many different quotes, but basically when we speak about emptiness, we're speaking about that things are interdependently originated. So we learn to see things in a new way.
다 동의시야의 시라게 차부 인자 아니 직파게네 대응을라 퍼진 마망아데 셰네 이주고 동의도 새롭게 퍼진 셰야데 리톰보지는 자갈라 우연히 갈래란자데잖아 리젤레비알레 레그로와 오테나 진짜네 답에 그 탑텐 삼페 나랑서 수시키올라 당보 짐바 당산 당루 짐베 짐바 당테니 술심 숭야다 테니 소파데야다 준리체야 당테니 something 라베야테도 숭네니 제니 코 셈다 하장 지네스인데 셈 하장 템포레 동이도베 셰라테 셈 템포시 두비아르 모도 셈 양아 영의지 뉴몬달 된게 셈 양아 영의지 두비아 메인자 발람 되잖아 때베 숭인자 시부진 내 첨보래 그 빠된 아주 동al 더야게 답실래 어떻게 빼면서 개첨부도 계산 지간 담보되는 통용도 연란디다 탐전에 두배 셰럽던도 숭 셰럽게 연란디다지 연란 아마 퍼진 아마데서 다 퍼진 세야들라 아주 삼당 와야래 송이 다 셔럽게 퍼진 저디가라 가르다 짐베 퍼진 소리지나 우만 주변은 짐바 진짜 렘페 똥에 똥서대요 순도아 짐바 진짜 렘바포 똥제기 제순가 애니베 라지메바 애니베 삼다네 라지메바 또나 다 디는 또베고네 라지메바 또베고네 짐바 당겐지나 짐베 퍼진 원에 셀든 차고래 짐베 퍼진 데라 애니베 파롤디 침바데라 타파와당 원에 원에서 니요래 원에 원숨도 또바데는 원에래 단 레지점기 고아차 야니 던지점기 고아차는 거네 애니 짐바당와이나 짐베 퍼진 타파와 차고 원에가 차고 말해 어때서 캔과들 되나신다 퍼진 전달을 저기래 파롤디 친즈디가라 송이 또 벨루에 징고를 가지 송이 원숨도 벨루에 지나 짐베 퍼진 원에가 차래 레지점지당 던지점지 고아차네 애니 디 셈베티 디 짐바이나 타파 차고래 군 파게 우만루르딘 저는 살본도 돼.
So this is a very difficult subject. It's very deep. The subject of emptiness is a very, very deep and difficult subject. It's very difficult to really wrap our heads around this subject. And so it's for this reason actually that the other that we start off with the other 5 practices of the perfections. And actually the first verse in this chapter, the 9th chapter, speaks to that, where it says, these branches of the doctrine, the enlightened sage expounded for the sake of wisdom. And so all that has been taught up to this point actually is really all for the purpose of attaining wisdom. And the purpose of attaining wisdom is to be free from suffering. And so we use, actually, these are all used together to come to the summit of the most, of the wisdom, the peak of wisdom. We use all of the other 5 to come to the peak of wisdom. So we need methods and we need skills in order to ascend a mountain. So we use all of these different skills to ascend a mountain. And when we reach the summit, then we've incorporated using many different skills and we come to the summit. But the purpose of all of those skills, although they do serve a purpose in and of themselves, the main purpose or the principal purpose is emptiness, or is to reach the top of that mountain. And so as we study and practice the 6 perfections, we start out with the practice of generosity and ethical discipline, and practicing tolerance and patience, and joyful effort and diligence, and then meditative concentration or focus, where we learn to incorporate the practices that will train our minds to be still and stable and focused. And it's said that in order to reach that summit of the mountain, to be able to perceive emptiness, that we cannot do that if our mind has many rising concepts and afflictions, is moving all over the place, or hasn't attained, we haven't attained stability or control over our minds. So all of these perfections, all of these 5 previous practices really work to bring us to that point where we then reach a stabilization of mind, so that we can achieve the perception of emptiness and the end of suffering. But we must look in particular at this word. So we have these 6, and they're called the 6 perfections. So we have what's called the perfection of generosity, the perfection of ethical conduct and so forth, and the perfection of wisdom. And so we learn in some of the Madhyamaka texts, the middle way texts, that there's a difference between wisdom, generosity and the perfection of generosity. Generosity becomes perfected when, through the realization that the giver, the receiver, and that which is given are all intrinsically free of any substantial existence. They are empty of intrinsic existence. Through the realization of that, if you then undertake the activities of being generous and giving, and then this is called a perfection, bringing it to perfection. Otherwise, if we're just directly handing something off, or wanting to fulfill a purpose and just like giving something, being charitable, this is generosity and there is benefit. This is the practice of generosity, but it's when we grasp the emptiness of everything involved here, the giver, the receiver, that which is given. When we grasp the emptiness of these things and still conduct ourselves in a giving way, then this is what brings it to perfection. And Geshe-la di uma gi jung gi tsen karela.
Uma juba.
Okay, entering the middle way.
Kanchi jimba parjin din roala. Rai jimba jimba borangi dembar mepa. Jinje zeyan dembar mepa. Jiul longmu ba de dembar mepa. Tisumgi dembar mepa mimi bi yenta tuna jib parjin rugu arwa. Demadan rugu amare.
And so in entering the middle way, it says, if it is to be the perfection of generosity sees that which is given is not truly existent. The one who gives is not truly existent. The one who receives is not truly existent. If one grasps this in their mind and is generous, this is the perfection of generosity.
Ta parchin de la dibu sherchin parchin de la dibu parchin sherchin zer na dikorta dibu sherchin jung sherchin lam sherchin zer sumre dibu sherchin zer de sange sadre lam sherchin zer da songyung sun to be lo de tagarang cha de yore ani jung sherchin zer na kanji tongi to be jung kar in chinjela ta pe 다 콜로 바바 다 콜로 바바 셔진 여러와 율월 자고 품베리 셔진 손로와 셔진데 중 셔진다 조자데 자모 동방이 때인자 중 텔레 중 셔진즈다래 와다테조 양 배전네 니용고라 와다 대나네 원에데 다 케비지줄 만다요래 다 융셔진데 셔진 따바 인 예제게단 바래 다 케바찌기 융셔진데 셔진 원에 인 람셔진데 셔진 원에 인생이지다 케바찌기 데 마인생이지 니여래 마인생인데 셔진은 디부 셔진인고 그래서 중고아래 상게 사마데 요마르다 베테 카보래
라소
와다 두스테네 시줄 망버다 데 시줄 요아래데 데 케비 시줄래 간지 동이 또 별로데 시부지 개 첨부 차대어라 나눠서 간지 개와 간데잖아 바로도 침발라 동이 무슨 놈 떠나 바로도 친기어래 개와 탐제 때마다 차고 말해.
Mhm.
딘디가 네 카보르 그뒤나 카보르 라비야 돼. 양켜서 심슈장에서 니지 말다. 심슈 차기어 말해. 나로 당부 마고도 가서 지연시기어 말와. 심슈 자나뜨니 빼 미시바 경라 그래. 심슈 자나 빼자 롱인도 구마와. 아니 야스치 뭐 지발에 나 지숭아 간지 줌비 풍발에 미타르즈데. 줌 되나 빼 수수 풍 그다페 제고 푸난다 연댕게 푸난다 아니 벤저게 푸난다 가리 풍발에 균 줌데이나테 디 조아 지금 말와 조아 맞으나 연댕 조아 맞으나 연댕 자그 말에 아니 벤저라 조아 맞으나 벤저 저고 말에 에 칼라다 툴로 라 벤저 타페 줌데는 베저 맞으나 툴로다 칼란 저고 말아 자자 때 덴바렌도 왔대 좀빼 칼로 닝집도 와 줌베 풍발에 미타르 숨어야 돼 균이 줌바 끝이네 지겨 말해 계산한 닌디시에서 계산을 텐데 드링 난 닌디시에서 포발에 와 소소 도난 도난이나 때 딜베 줌들에 장화제라 빌가당 그래 준디 라징기 준디 레기래 개버려래 그때이나 소소소소라 직 로존 지금 뭐다 지셔네 니 지수이란치니 두스체네더니 소소 야르겐도 그래 네 심슈자에 돈달라고 말다 라진 지탄에 타고요래 디 타고요 인자 nga shigimidu samsamli 균이 samtangyo 말해 대다 타고리래 오늘 곰불루두 저저니 베 나렌다 개바 망부 베 남가 कर्मा나 지중레데 거쳐나 진짜 개바 망부 중레데 때는 자모통바닐라 제세 지침바 gem근데 때는 유용주레도 곰불루두 그래 사게 강래 다와타 파레 아리안 대와레 이 신디 대와 지와라레 데니 뉴뉴지 장가게야지도 와 데인데가라 코 맞아 데니 중산지든 잘레데 나메 선함레 빼야고 중선데 뽑아개거라 수소 도난기 깨주고래 빼미스게 쳔버래 네 뽑아자에 돈 달라고 말다 라징기 타고 임바다 세세째 걸어와
올라서 and then we have, so when we speak about the perfection, we have the sixth perfection. There's also the perfection of the result, the perfection of the text, the perfection of the path. And so the perfection of the result, so the result brought to perfection is the state of Buddhahood, the level of an enlightened being. The perfection of the path is the direct perception of emptiness, directly seeing emptiness, or reaching the path of seeing. And the perfect scripture or perfect text would be within the Prajnaparamita texts that are actually bring, all of the scriptures to perfection. And so some masters, actually also say, that there is, just like we read in the wisdom teachings or Prajnaparamita teachings, there is no Buddha, there is no path, and so forth. This is also spoken, and this is a very, very deep and difficult to understand subject. Again, brings it to emptiness. We get to see the lack of any real intrinsic existence of any of these things. But whatever virtue we do, if we want it to be a perfection, or if we want to bring any activity to its perfected, its full perfected potential, what we must do is be embracing a view and an understanding of the reality, of the nature of reality, which is the emptiness of the situation and objects and so forth. This brings it to a perfection. But this is something, again, this is, very, very difficult. It's very, very difficult. And so this is something that if we don't, strive in, we won't be able to fulfill it. We won't be able to perfect it. And then, if we become defeated, then we will not be able to realize potential. If we're defeated in, let's say we have a goal of accomplishing something and we become defeated, then we won't have the inspiration and feeling anymore of wanting to engage. If we're defeated in our activities, then we'll be poor of material wealth and money and so forth. Or if we're defeated, we won't be able to interact with the world in a way that will allow us even to be able to provide for ourselves, provide food for ourselves. So even in, everyday living standards, if we're defeated, if we have a mindset of feeling defeated and discouraged, then we won't get out there and do what we have to do to even survive. And here we're talking about, the realization of emptiness. And so absolutely, we must make sure, even Shantideva, cautions us against feeling discouraged and defeated and downtrodden. Because if we are feeling those things, then we won't be inspired and we won't make progress along the path. However, if we stay uplifted, even when something is difficult, prodding ourselves along, then one day something that we hadn't known before, we'll get it. And we'll have a feeling like, of encouragement, natural encouragement, like, I can get it. And so then we will just naturally and automatically be inspired. And so we need to stay uplifted and inspired and rejoice in our efforts here along the path. And Geshe-la says that, he's mentioned many times, the 9th chapter on wisdom is very difficult. He said it's very difficult. He's mentioned it many times. And that's not because he feels like you, the students and disciples, won't put into it and work hard. It's not that. It's not that you don't have what it takes to understand it. It's that it is a naturally difficult subject to understand. And so one should never, in your course of studies think, I'm never going to get this. I don't get it. I'm not going to get it. One shouldn't, excuse me, think like that. Understand the rarity and how few individuals really did understand this at a very deep level. We can really count them on our fingers. How many were so involved in the deep understanding of like decoding the emptiness of things? We can count them out here. There aren't many. We have Master Nagarjuna, we have Chandrakirti, we have Aryadeva and Shantideva. Really just a handful of historically of people who have really understood this at a very deep level. And so we shouldn't get discouraged. Actually, we should be encouraged that we are studying this, that so few before us have been fortunate enough to do.
야, 또 시대가 딱 계산 손대긴 되게 깨르쳐들이지래 간신 시부지께 전부 차대로 가서 세지대 가서 룽알을 거야 돼 탑람 떼지 부마다 믿어 송이 하고에 고고야 돼 빼면시브 내 쳐버려도 와
Mhm. So
인도가라 룽알 만드나 딱 룽알 강 매종행기 로데 송이 또 별로데 라귤이 끼바째고라 딱 갈리 개버라 빼면시브 내 쳐버 차대로 와 나라서 센디기 짜자지 보들 가서 지갈래 개군도 니 깨와니 깨와 사람니 세버라 빼 돈다 첨부지 주야서 델레게 갈레마 개구도
Mhm. So this subject is something that is of particular and extreme importance, especially for those who wish to free themselves from suffering. And actually, it's very simple. We have one thing that we are looking to rid ourselves of, and that is, unsatisfactory and difficult suffering circumstances. And then there's one thing to realize: emptiness. So we have to be always thinking about these two things. And so for those who don't desire to have a suffering existence, who have just had it with being subject and at the mercy of that which leads to suffering, and if you really desire to be free from that, then we must strive, on the other hand, then in what sets us free. And that is in seeing the reality, seeing the truth of emptiness. So if we think about how much, we work in this life and how many things we put ourselves to and, are always working and making effort in. And here we have something that is of profound importance to our very existence, our happiness, of a very happy existence. And so not only in this life, but in, life after life, this will be of just primary importance. And so we must strive for that one thing, to realize emptiness.
니시 자와 제비 장주기 셈대당 동인기도 따와데 갓 에실다와야 시바데 에니 냠네 케 투바지 제와데 네 전부 차대요래 데마도 신이 냠네 맞이나 다 디펜도게요 말에 다 냠네 케 투바지 데 시바데 냠네 케 투바지 간디안 장교데 때간에 냄비캡 투바지 제거래 데이나 데니다 당원이 수수이 기빈 더든잖아 털두기 돈 당원마다 천디자 많이 봐 치마 편전이 두두그리 자주 섬기 따주네 내내 대원로알아 섬시수이 이루 규르스기도 와 자주기 셈게 아니 배 딸에 빼자네 디 자주기 셈다 통이도벨 따와대 냠는 지나 아니 따배 대원네 대와 레기르 마도 이루 마레스 텔라페 Tronang legor, dadung pe jentin cheda, ani pe di pe tronang legor. Shibuji pendo chimbore.
And so now, how can we then focus ourselves on a day-to-day basis in order to bring ourselves along the path? On an ongoing basis, we should always grasp and embrace the mind of bodhicitta, caring for others, along with the view of emptiness. So we should go about our day with great compassion and altruistic motivation and the view of emptiness. For it's not enough for us to just learn the material. We need to learn the material, then practice the material. It is through practicing the instructions that we then progress along the path and actually bring about these results for these realizations and progress to arise in our mind stream. So to make any headway, it's not just about understanding the material, because that won't happen if we understand the material, but we don't put it into any practice. We don't take anything up, we just learn it. But what we need to do is we have to understand the instructions and then practice them on an ongoing basis. For these practices, this path will then counter our previous experiences in a way that now brings us new results and brings us progress that not only we will see in this life, but in life after life after life. We will see improvement, we will see benefit, we will see happiness, as it was said earlier in this text, that mounting the horse of bodhicitta, we go from life to life, happiness to happiness. Who, knowing this, would be too meek to mount that horse? And so here, bodhicitta, the perfect intent of bodhicitta, is being compared to like the swift horse that will gallop us to happiness. So if we practice bodhicitta, and if we're practicing this while we have an understanding and a viewpoint of emptiness, this is the practice that will bring us from life to life, of bliss to bliss. And as it says here, who would be who would procrastinate this, or who would be reluctant to mount such a horse, or take such a path that would bring one happiness, life after life?
Yeah, that 주수지 진성 견한속 또스 말수기게.
Okay, so Geshe-la says we've already been talking about an hour. We could take a little break here. 5 or 10 minutes.
다 subject 감나 대코능이 지터도베 탑세다. 다 대코능이 니루 디시고라. 다 니루 들어와. 니루 에네베 자모통바니데 간디스 이 학과에게 탑시 가려래. 탑된 발라스. 다 subject 숨 링이게 남자 아니 타르바줍제 타르바점 터버는데 봐 송이 또 봐스 다 nenjung sambezene songi tonata tharpatu ata teshigore songi repeat ba gebarse bas sumche ta dengi namja tela ngwetang songi ngoni be tsoba fonga niche tambolo sum ta ngwetela dengi ngwetela sumche dengi ki yawa sengi tenla bebe kansa ngwezunga sta kanse dengi shes tenla bebe kansa te tengeri yoken kansa te ngwezunga ta dus sungar sum ta tangbo dengi ki yawa tela solo ka nipa de kampa tangbo ni de ki gore solo ka nipa yorwa kampa tangbo ni de dengi ki yawa shi gore kunsup tangni tontamte teni demba ni sundes ta kunsup demba ni la ta shijalena demba ni de yiji sheja ja gore sheja de yiji je tele yena yesi jiji gorwa tele yena ani pe kunsup demba da tontam demba as ta kunsup densa kunsup den tontam den zezigido a kanchi lo kunsup ngor den inzang kunsup den bas lo kunsup base digala lo ninang chingilo ta chingi kablo theng gor salfo lo ninang chingilo ani pe ngaranzo tanda ngazu yugi lo de ninang chingilo chadi gore ninang o
Ninang sana?
Ninang sidugala yulda yulchen yul zurdu yukan yulchen zurdu yukan dua. Ninang dela ninang jatan sumyore. Yulchen gi nawa chiche, ninang chiche. Ani tunji nawa chiche. Chujingi nawa chiche. Tesukanga ninang la jagore. That this kanchi yulda yulchen zane ganchi sunangido ngazo yul side pena tep soji na pagini yoga zonde jinji yulde mishide tape tep nange mishide zurdu yorwa ganchi sunangido wa ninang chare.
Okay.
Ta di lo tende ene pe shepa tende jingola den inza kunzup den baasi ndashena kunzup den baasi ta lo ton tamba zida ta pe nyamja balja wada ta pape nyamja ishi songi tobi ishi la ene pe ta karsa gore ninang yomare ninang nubi sugi to gore
Minam no
ninang nubi
yamare.
ninang nubire ninang yomare ninang nubada ninang meada nin chikpare ta
Okay.
wata di gola ene pe kurang chuni kyang mado chuni de 이 최진대야 난거 말에 유일생 양치소 난거 말에 군섭에 나와요 말에 제인전 다 간시 덴세 돈담 덴세 로다 로돈담바 파빙염자 이시드 자고래
Also, okay. So hopefully everyone is back. And now as we begin to look next at the second verse, we first have, so we have the categories of looking at the way. So there are three main categories here. The first one is looking at the way to have the wisdom that realizes suchness arise in the mind. The second, the need to accomplish the realization of emptiness in order to achieve liberation. And third, understanding the way to accomplish the reasoning that points to the realization of emptiness. And so first, in the first thing that we look at when it comes to specifically that first category of the way to have the wisdom that realizes suchness arise is we look at what is posited when in context of the two truths. And we look at this as actual entities and the emptiness aspect of these things. So we look at the two truths and what is posited about the two truths. And first we look at entities, actual entities, and then we look at the different categories and differentiations when it comes to the true truths in their definitions and the teachings of how we come to understand the two truths. And we understand when it comes to, when it says how to have the wisdom that realizes suchness arise in the mind stream. When we speak about the wisdom of suchness, what this means is the true abiding nature, the true mode of reality. This is a very profound level of understanding things at a sphere, a very profound level. And this is the level where emptiness comes in. This is what is called the wisdom of suchness. And so, so this is the ultimate level. And so the reason that we need to realize the ultimate level is then, it's said in the second of those major categories, in order to be liberated. So in order to be liberated, we need to realize suchness. And the third thing that we do is we look specifically at these, what are called the two truths. And there is what is called the relative truth and the ultimate truth. And so first we look at the relative truth. And it said relative truth, ultimate truth. And so why are we using these terms if it's a truth that it's relative? This is because the relative truth is the way things are perceived through the intellect. When the intellect is used, when we see things through the lens of the intellect, then there are two. We have a subject and an object. So we're seeing things subjectively we have the subject, and then we have that which the subject perceives, or the object. And so there are different kinds of perception. There are three different kinds of perception. This is the first kind of perception. So for example, the eyes now see something. There is the subject, a perceiver, and the object, that is what is perceived. Whenever the intellect is engaged, then this is seeing things through a relative perspective. And that's why we call it a relative truth. We're seeing things relatively through our subjective perception. That's relative truth. Now, then there is the way of perception, a perception that happens that is beyond the intellect. For example, the perception of the Arya beings or of noble beings who in their equipoise, so through their, in a meditative stillness, are perceiving things through the wisdom of equipoise. And when there's a perception that happens through the wisdom of equipoise, there's no intellect being engaged. There's no duality. There is no subject and object. They are not there. It is not relative. So there is no, this object is relative to a subject that is observing it. So this is a not relative perception, or in other words, then it is the ultimate truth or an ultimate perspective. And then this is, we see this spoken to in the first two lines of the second verse, where it says, relative and ultimate, these two truths are declared to be. The ultimate is not, yeah, okay, just that. Relative and ultimate, these two truths are declared to be. Lasso.
니바 되게 가르쳐오래. 강바치만이 되게 가르치고 그러는데, 링이 생이 드시고 그래. 생이 다 빼내 쳐버려. 링이 있는데 다 고아 차야 돼. 생이 당 고아 차고 구라. 왔다 내 쳐버려. 돈담로이 주인민 로니 군소 임반도 세대 따뜻이 순고래. Don tambade lui juil mensiade logi togu mebekaje shigo marta pabinyamje de loderwa shibarwa ninang jingi lui juil dondam singinde dondam chusiade nilusiade ninang jingi lui juil mano juil mares ninang jingi lui totu mares dondam lui juil loni tendawe ninang jingi lode yani 군섭으로 왔어. 그런 군섭이 치러 왔어. 딘디가라 디기 돈담도 두 마레제 숨으로마다 돈담 로기 율 마르지 양 데니 케바시 쟁이 요래.
아, 가리?
케바젠다 데니 돈담바데 루이주 율 마르지 숨근 누가?
몰랐어.
케바 누가 데니.
몰랐어.
단다 집에나 돈담 루이주 율 면시야데 니난 징기 루이주 율 마레스. 니난 멤비 규젠데 니난 징기 로데 군섭으로 왔어. 두스 숨도와. 규젠데. 와데 티교르단 테니 맞아 생이 대 답하게 생이 되지 주고.
몰랐어. And so in the next two lines in this verse, we look at the two truths and their definitions. And this is very, very important, the delineation of the meaning of what is to be interpreted here, understanding the meaning of the two truths. It's very important that we come to understand what they mean. And here, next, the second two lines say, the ultimate is not within the reach of the intellect, for intellect is said to be the relative. And so it says here, the ultimate is not within the reach of the intellect. And what is meant here is that one cannot perceive what is beyond the intellect with a mind that is using the intellect. When we are engaging the intellect, then the perceptions that come out of that are relative. So we cannot see what is beyond the intellect or the ultimate with the intellect. We cannot see it. So the thinking mind is the relative mind. And so Geshe-la says, when whatever the intellect sees, whatever we see through examination and thought process and mind engagement is not ultimate. However, there are some scholars and masters that do say that that the absolute or the ultimate can be seen with the intellect. And Geshe-la says we'll get more into this now, what exactly this means, these definitions. And do we have other maybe translations before we move on of verse number 2?
I can read the Wallace translation.
Okay.
그저 깜바땅분이 돼 말로 불러대.
Tampo or Chatsang.
차단 로션지그러다.
Yeah, it's okay. We could read the whole, actually the full verse 2.
하고가 돼 깜바땅분이기 링잉 예와됐대. 치마니 되게 증이 됐던 거 알아. 다 돈당 얼마 됐대.
Okay, but what you should, yes, please go forth and read the full verse, but understand that the first two lines are pointing out the two distinctions, the two classifications, meaning that there is relative and ultimate, and the second defines what those, the differences between the two.
Okay. So verse 2 of the Wallace translation is, this truth is recognized as being of two kinds, conventional and ultimate. Ultimate reality is beyond the scope of the intellect. The intellect is called conventional reality.
The Alexander Berzin translation is surface and deepest, conventional and ultimate. These are accepted as being the two truths. The deepest, ultimate, aren't cognitive objects of the dualistic mind. The dualistic mind is spoken of in terms of the surface, conventional.
다 렘바니 용해야 돼. 낭출 터도 여바들라 군습 렘바. 내출 터도 여바들 던단 렘바 세과 이거 원잖아. 다 여름지야는도 숨도. 아 송이 원에 시공은 이제 줄텐 세리바라 줄텐 content physics. 대속에 낭출다 내출 미tum바 인자 제집제네. 맞죠? 낭출다지 매야지. 내출데 고 배 제바찌기찌기는 균이에요 말아. 동바차로 와. 타마들라 컴퓨터는 타는 타말라 티 레용다 티즈네 레고. 자자티 배 내가 침버렸대. 맞아. 남비체도 따다 튼거래. 송이 셔야 되다. 맞아. 셔름님 실진 이게 찍맞을 돼. 이게 찍맞을 돼. 아스데 간다라 봐. 가래 까거래. 율문이 여봐도 까거래. 그래서 된 거다. 다 제자 세리바드게 율문이 된 자왕이니요 말했어. 다 되게 들전 세리바드죠. 피직스도 율문이 자다는 재미도스. 가지 1000원이 자고도스. 건조바즈도 지자고도 미시 다 건조 장장을 제네 미시다 나 왕비시바마도 자투치고 말아. 제가 낭비 딜은 디제데 답에 다기니 주선 아 니랑 징기 시바스데 군소베 가서 이시 군소베 시바 이디가라 예 유일전 타도도 나와 연대긴 나와 지점 예베링다라 시바데 군소 차디어레 디응올레 요죠 니랑데 제베 랑우스토베 로데기 니랑데 제베 토나 군소 뎀바 군소 뎀베 칭이리 뭐 예와레 칭이레 칭이
Okay, 양케르 칭.
랑우스움 토베 르 니랑데 제베 토버차와데 군소 뎀바 랑우스움 토베 르 니랑 메베 술기 토바데 돈담 뎀바시 거다 Tati kinazo igiti tik be yabore. Tik son sta tondam demba to kunzo dembe kebar de hago gore.
And so we have this term, the two truths. And what this really comes down to is the way things appear and the way things really are, the actual reality of that appears. And His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, is always saying that there is a segment of our population who really understand what this means. And this is the quantum physicists. Those that understand things at an atomic and subatomic level. They understand fully that there is a discrepancy between the way things really are and the way things they appear to be in this world. Through their analyzation and scientific observation of objects, they have found that what their final finding, scientific finding is in the end, there's nothing to be found. The object of their observation can't be found. What they find in the end is broken down to a void, to a zero. It's like taking all of these numbers and breaking it down. In the end, what you really find is nothing to quantify except zero. And this is a vital, vital point. And this is exactly what Buddhism also posits, and what Buddhist logic has found, is that when we really examine objects and break them down, there is nothing to be found. So the same thing that the quantum physicists find. And so there is the meditation on the syllable ah. When we meditate on ah, or when we understand the meaning of ah, the syllable, like the Tibetan syllable ah, signifies this non-existence. It's a negating syllable. Instead of it representing something, it represents that there is nothing to be posited. And what this means is that, and so this is what science works with. What it comes down to, the meaning of ah, is that there is no actual reality in appearing entities. And this is what quantum physics finds. And this is what quantum physicists understand. Nothing really exists. And they come to this understanding through, microscopic and, different, like tools of examination to break things down at an atomic level. And they come to understand that nothing really exists. There's nothing really there. So understand. So back to the two truths. When we talk about relative truth or relative reality, relative things, this is through the lens of an intellect that is perceiving. So there is both an object to be perceived and there is a subject perceiving it. So there are these two. It is dualistic. And whenever we have an intellect engaged and an object of that observation, that is a relative truth. And whenever there is an observation that is made, or whenever there is a process that is that does not use that intellect, but that realizes something, then this is an ultimate realization. And so there's the definition, and Geshe-la says if we can write this, and so maybe I can get the Tibetan and we can really write it nicely. He said it would be very good for you to write this down and contemplate and think about it and read it, and you will understand what the two truths are. When one's mind and intellect is engaged in perceiving, this is relative truth. When there is not the intellect, dene dundam ki dampa ki tseni dinang la dene
rang musu topelo rang ninang nupi sulgi topar jawa. Ninang nupi sulgi topar jawa.
Okay, Yankir.
Rang musu topelo rang ninang nupi sulgi topar jawa. Ninang nupi. Ninang nup. Ninang mewa. Oh, ninang nupi sulgi topar jawa. Ninang me pasi gor tonda. Ninang me pe gorni tongende tondam demba. Ninang de jebe topate kunsop demba si gor.
So then in the second, so then in the ultimate, I was just clarifying that when the mind of the intellect has receded, it is not there, and there is a realization. Without the perspective of an engaged intellect, this is the ultimate truth.
The kebardo ta nangbe sherning se de sherchin se de la tagi jung sherchin de la yumsu judin ze she yore yum bumpa yore ani sheram ning bo yore tene be tangka mangbo yobe nane sherchin iki chima sing de a se aji bore tigi tongni tengorta a se nga gandare kar ka gore 맞아 나나 신이 율문이 여봤지 난기도 와 수두도 여겐지 띠까게 와래 아 세대 제가 맞아 홈게들 미들 아자에 고바테레 동이 곰거다 그래서 빼면서 내가 첨버래 제가 가차데 덴버 투바와 덴투팅 타바타중게 덴투데 요마라와 덴버 투바 요마라와 다 덴투 메아나 가서 난겨와 같이 난겨와 가서 로콤베 왕게 난겨와래 토마 메바네 텔라 콤바치 주베 용게네 유르모비니 요바데 난겨와래 문에 제바젠도나 요나 코유 문에 덴바이 요이나 그 제바치 살루 워데 제바체스루 코 맹맹 차루 워래 데 율무는 메베 따데 때생이고도 문이 여나 제바제스루 살루 워라 살루 민로 메아 차루고도 아 세야데 오다란 수투도 용아 라진기 요 렘바리오 와데 때까고 워래 간다레 에시고래
So there are the perfection of wisdom scriptures, which come in very elaborate volumes, or for example, we have the perfection of wisdom in 100,000 verses, the perfection of wisdom in 800, the perfection of wisdom in 20,000 verses, and we have the
니르지 니스타지 여러 쇼로가 니스타지 셰르닝보 냥아 시진 냥아 빠져 니스테가 여러 쇼로가
Then we have the perfection of wisdom, the very concise perfection of wisdom that has 25 lines. And then in its most, so these are all the perfection of wisdom, elaborating the wisdom of emptiness. And then we have the perfection of wisdom, the short perfection of wisdom. And then even shorter than that is the single syllable ah. All of this is signifying the same thing, non-existence. This ah syllable is signifying the lack of intrinsic existence, a lack. There is no subject, there is no object, there's no perceiver or anything to be perceived. Ah, emptiness. And so when we meditate on the syllable ah, we're meditating on emptiness. And again, as far as true and substantial reality, this does not exist. Even though there is no true, concrete, substantial reality, still, it's the way it appears to us. And why is this? It is just through our habitual tendencies. It is something that we started doing and kept doing and have done so much that it is just like autopilot. It is our habitual tendency. That is just naturally what we do. But when we look into the matter further, we find that it is not true. If there were true and substantial reality, when we put things to the test, when we put things to critical analysis, what we would find is they would become clearer and clearer, more solidified, more clear, more real, more solid. But that's not what happens. As we apply critical analysis, this starts to fall away. And what we find is what we thought was there is not really there. We don't find what we're looking for. We find the lack of what we're looking for. So under analysis, if things are real, they become clearer. If things aren't really that way, then that reality we begin to see through it and that begins to fall away. And so even clinging to a substantial reality is something that falls away when we are under the perception of emptiness, or when we meditate on ah. When we meditate on ah, what is being negated or what is not there is our perception of things as they appear.
세상 맞죠? 낭야데 율문이 강갑에 차바케 뒤가라 다 잘라지난다 아니 배 둘러지난다 아니 직 자율대 닝지부 이동하지 율문이 여바지 통과하러 와 원래는 파체파체든 제대로는 율문이 때 닝지부지 통해 균이어 말아 제방문에 제바젠도나 제단 풍해야 돼 맞죠? 낭줄되게 풍주고도 와 제단 가야 돼 나와대 까고 가래 맞죠? 낭줄되 시고 가래 렘바르투바 만탈라 렘바르투 시디가라 율고니 추투도 요간 낭야데 따띠 시고 때문에 매제 탑시리 콘트롤 케디가라 차당 케디가라 율 당샘 케디가라 율때 이도 명시 통과로 와 소소 이거 벤 리븐 리서치도 대양인주로 통과도 와 율고니 매다 따뜻이 따가란데 땡기도 와 배나 제들란 란란하지 있는 세멜라베 디부 슈차에던 연구도 안 가죠.
La distropochoma.
제들란 라지니. 세 부충충 갈다베 로니 정한이 슈레데 빠지디지라 마가전은 라인 라나제니. 때 수수양 롱업주주주 너디 갈다 되긴 라쟁에 미데 제네 디 트로부 차르고도.
오리리.
계속 유력권은 매번 따라와.
리리리.
되게 돼 삼당 거라. 아주 야네 양도 삼당 거래. 유력권은 매사들라 빼 미스베 삼당 거래.
And so we speak about these appearances or things that we interact with in our environment, these objects and so forth. If we we see them as very fixed and very real, very concrete and absolute in their beingness. And for that reason, we can become attached to them. Let's take something that, an object, be it, I don't know, maybe a beautiful piece of jewelry or a car, a machinery or some outfit or clothes, but we like it. We're coming from a perspective of liking that object. And why is that? It's because there's something attractive or appealing, something that draws us in and magnetizes us about that object or those clothes. There's something appealing about it, and that draws us. And then we develop like a preference for it, a liking towards it. It looks good. But we get attracted to it because it looks fancy or nice or beautiful. But if we were to pick it apart, it wouldn't be beautiful. If we were to scratch the surface and look a little closer, there's nothing beautiful. There's nothing fancy. And there's nothing to like. And what attracted us in the beginning is that initial appearance, that what we looked at and saw, that, oh, beautiful gleaming crystal bowl. Oh, how nice if I could own it. It's the way that we take it to be. So that's what we've got to get rid of. If we get rid of that step in the process of taking it in its mere appearing state and seeing it more for what it actually is, so that's what we're looking to have cease. That's what we're looking to block in this whole process. And actually, what we understand from deconstructing things in that way is there's no true and concrete reality. We see things as fixed and unchanging, and that's the way they are. There's a true reality to them. But actually, when we look at appearances closer, we will see they are not what they appear, nor are they true and real and fixed. We can really use this kind of information and understanding in situational aspects of our lives. For example, think about it. When you get angry at someone or feeling resentful towards them, why is it? It's because your mind thinks there's some reality in that person or in that situation, and therefore you're mad, or you're resentful, or maybe you're attracted. But there is no fixed reality in that outer object, in that outer event and situation. Things are not fixed and absolute, nor what they appear to be. And we can understand that through experience if we look back at the childhood stage of maybe people that we knew when we were young. So when we're little, we have, when we're young, we may have, a childhood enemy. They may have become our enemy on the playground at whatever age. Later on, as life goes on, they can become a best friend, or vice versa. So there's no fixedness. This is all very, very fluid. And where we get caught up is we see that object, event, or situation is real. It's really like this. And that's what, tricks us up.
Wata rangosudo bello rangi nina mebisugi tongende tada rangosudo bello sedigala 파빈냠자 이시 파빈냠자 이시기 다 유든 중인 잘령도가라 다 니랑 균매도 타나 추진이 나와는 거래 다 추진자나 빼나 추진자다 그 동시 추진데 라거와 빼나 붐 가서 거래 대비상기 기답 이 대비상기 대브란지 매바데 대비상기 칭이래 대때 추진 다 대비상기 칭이 되는 밥석이 추진들이 추진되는 거 말이냐면 이실라 칭이 되는 거래 제 추진 스디가라 파기 칭이 되는 밥석 이들이 다때
가오자지
바오제구지
바오
텔람 칭이 텔람 바비 지드레 다디 강갈 저기르다 배낭 가르소레 간사 시디갈라이 간사 승 간사 라지 메바 간사 덴버 메바데 간사 당에 동의를 와 간사 시디 간사 당 동의를 텔람 밥적이 지디 차디어레 최진들은 때렸다 다 제자 추징이 나와 누구어래 구섭에 나와 누구어래 유일징이 나와 누구어래 냠자병 올릴 때 숨가요 말해 구섭이 최진 난거 말해 냠자라빠 춘이 짱짱 똥상 코랑지마도 난거 말해
라소 드네 강사 아니 소소기 케보기 강사클라 아니 드네 숨 난기오레 카리 숨 보대 카리
추징이 나와요 말해 추진 아니 구섭에 나와요 말해
너 디 팍박이 난와
밥이 냠자 이실라
냠샤 이예실라
바빠서는 제도바 용거라 제도바 난거와 냠자 이시바 냠자다 갑라
라소 드네 카리 난기요 말해
구섭에 나와 추징이 나와 유징 나와
디 숨파디 디 스포문도
디 순간은 이거 말해 디 순간 니나 누구래 추징 짱바마다 추니 짱바마다 추징 주는 거 말다
You know, gangsak ani soso kebogi gangsak la dene kunzo
당마졸라
ki
강가
nangwa
열어와.
laso.
마졸라 숨가 난기도와. 군소배 나와 열에 박인 위원되긴 배 군소배 나와 레기 어래 취진 나와 레기 어래 유일진 타드도 나와대 레기 어래 누아
Laso dene tangpo dang sumpagi kebar ani kunzo ki nangwa dang yulchen ki nangwa ki kebar kariore.
유일진 나와 세디가라 유일진 나와서도 양치수 나와대 낭줄 들어와 군소빠 세디가라 답로 군소배 골란 렌제 세나미도 다 맞아 나는 연대가라 박인이 영에서 난 거와 맞아라 나와 숨가요래 같이
Laso yulchen ki nangwa kandrere.
율쟁이 나와라래 율쟁 나와 그냥 말해 율쟁 제니 난 거와 난줄데 라거와
Laso.
율쟁이 나와 그냥 라고 말해 율쟁 양치수 난줄
Laso di okay dene chik serpomando kunzo ki nangwa dang yulchen ki nangwa ki kebar kariore.
군섭이 나와라 유지증이 나와래 보고요 말아 레고요 말아 유지증 나와라 군섭이 나와 같이 레기래
Laso. And so we have the perceptions of relative truth that come through the engagement of the intellect. And we have the Arya perceptions that come without the engagement of the intellect. There is no subject perceiving in an Arya, in an Arya's perception. When an Arya perceives, they're not perceiving through a subject, and they do not perceive an object. They perceive dharmata, and so there is the object is dharmata. That is what is perceived. They see dharmata. They do not see the various objects of someone perceiving through the intellect, seeing a relative truth, but they rather see the very basis, like the raw, substance of appearances, which is dharmata. All appearances are seen as dharmata when an Arya being is meditating. In post-meditation, then the different perceptions come in. But while someone is in a state of equipoise, of that level of equipoise, then what they see is the very basis of dharmata. And so that's those are the perceptions of an Arya being. They do not see, while they are in meditative equipoise, they do not see relative appearances, and they do not see subject-object appearances. So this is not, objects don't appear like the way objects appear to a subject in that kind of a relationship, subject-object relationship. And earlier on, I had forgotten to add that Geshe-la mentioned, it's not that the Arya beings or those that have reached the path of seeing and who are in meditative equipoise, it's not that they don't have and that are able to have the equipoise of an Arya being. It's not that they don't have or possess an intellect. It's not that they don't possess mind. It's at the time of meditative equipoise, it's not engaged. It has receded. It is not being engaged.
니난다 랑무스도 별로 니난다 집이 또 버자와 toba chedela kunzobi chedega kunzobi chedela ta ko jisade mari balik teni yondegenji chedela nyomong cho kuni nyomong cho la gore ko ribi gyapte mendeke mari badeze riba ishita tata ngalda chade yorwa deme tupji giripa tata ngalda inde ko di wangi kendege nyomong de tamje tape ko karse gore ka nangsul tardu ngazo 두고 와르데 디 타지도다 리베 켄고 와라 제파제나 타지도 리베 켄고 와라 되게데 samdhana pe samdha ribe samdhaina ko mea chaya ji ore ta semi gesen yondegenji jamba nije oda chanjugi sem digide tape digide guzop terede 구조 덴바레레데 말로 군소베 몰라 댕기 거레데 티야 리베 케고 마레 딜라 리베 겹생 요레 코 가저지 장아지리 곰바제들 코 냐는제나 로코는 콘도 펠데 셈레 지데 망가 중거와 어디지 개발다 하고 왔다 때리
Ina yang di jampadang ninje dang di
군소브레 데 코 가저지 장아지리 곰바 게지리 콜라 리베 겹생 요레 콜라 에네베 장아지리 셈레 데키 되기래 그래서 태조진야다 대당 다 녀모저기 초데 마리보 왕기 중대긴지 인친젤라 녀모 간데지나 제박 간데지나 마리발네 중엔데 고 삼단시리 고 매차거래 삼와다는 고 곰바슈 춤에 왕기 고 슈춤 뭐야 가서 빼 누알 슈춤 딩거래 가지 매줘야 돼 때리다
And so we have the intellect through using the intellect. While engaging the intellect, what we perceive are relative phenomena. And these relative phenomena, our relative experience is based in ignorance. And due to this overarching ignorance, we have the arising thoughts and conceptions, negative emotions that arise. And this is the cycle that we are in relatively. But if we use logic and use these trainings, constantly analyzing, constantly looking to decipher something deeper, trying to decode what's really going on, and at the same time work with love and compassion and bodhicitta and view. These are all things that we are doing through the intellect, so they are relative phenomena. Yet these relative phenomena act so love and compassion and bodhicitta, for example, they back up and support the reasoning, our trainings and our reasonings and our intellectual process of working to get to an experience, a direct experience of emptiness. They are not the ultimate truth themselves. They're not ultimate in themselves, but they back up and support our process. And not only that, through them, we gain happiness, peace and happiness. And they begin to break down the ignorance that is underlying negative mental states, the negative mental states that bring us suffering. So through developing these and training with these, we will break down the ignorance that right now is the stronghold of our afflictive emotions and our suffering.
다 개버도와 군섭텔라 코 제바제 지리 코 매차야 콜을 견도 통해야지 지라 지데 제바제 지리 콜로페 냠len 제 지리 삼탄 지리 로텐 콤파 타메트 필기어라라 잠바데 니주도 콤나페 콤진 깨말 마테 바페 콤파 타메트 필기어라라 시부지 펜도여라 다 가서 티 연대는 균 통과 말아 잠바데 니지도 꼼파 타메도 필기어다 맞아 통과 말아 마통 인사 때라 떠나리고 때 떠나 말에 인사 딘 디부딩 간디지미디 하고가 말아 제자 예바르 딘이 최고다 지데 심지 제지리 뉴몬 초데 심지 제지리 고 매차한도야 아니 다 군섭 군섭은 원래 덴발란 란다 임발라 잠바다 니지도 가져지 제바제 지리 애니베 냠낸 제 지리 로 펠기요하지 로 펠람자마다 타메도 펠기요를 거와 그 개발도하다 타메도 다 뺐다가 타메와 빼
타메바 라소
타무메바 펠기요를 라베
라소. And so there is a process here, a methodology of both deconstructing something that is unwanted, unhelpful, and unnecessary, and building up and supporting, developing things, developing qualities that bring us to the desired result. And so there's a process happening. It's a twofold process. On one hand, using our relative mind to analyze, to research, to see things, see through things, we actually destroy our belief in them. So there is a destruction happening, an intentional destruction that we're breaking down our former system, that our belief and understanding, all of this is being broken down. And at the same time, through love, compassion, bodhicitta, we are building up qualities. We are building up really qualities that, are unlimited. They're infinite. We can infinitely build them up. And this is a really, very, very, very important process and important point to understand. We are both deconstructing and constructing at the same time. Because we have been so accustomed to the way we have understood things to be up until this point, we're very, very entrenched. And so therefore, this is something that we are going to have to undo some things, and we're going to have to build other things up. But again, this process is going to destroy, in the end, it will destroy the afflictive emotions, negative mental states, all that is unwanted that is happening within the mind stream. And then using the intellect and using relative constructs, positive, to build those positive states of mind in this methodology of loving kindness, compassion, bodhicitta, then we're building something up that really is infinite and unbounded, boundless positive qualities. So it's a twofold process that's happening here.
오다 때 시부께 침부차를 남배중 가시나 양 니승도 덴바니 지디가라 군소 덴발라 아니 배 군소 심게 자야당 돈담 덴발라 돈담 심게 동반이 자야 된대 연구하래 답에 군소 쳐다 군 심게 레델라 고 말와 tas 군소 심게는 땡쇼데 답에 군소 덴베는 땡쇼데 고 론냠nen잖아 필요하대 장주기 셈데 자고와 딘도 때 디기다 가족이 장아지리 가족이라 디키 망 용고와 다 몸에 디키 디부장고 징거와
탐을
탐 답에 디부 다 셈나데 디키 망부 되기와 다 몸에 봐
탐을 오케이
때 디부 징거와 대왕기 자고와 저자 딱 맞아 뒤준도 제받겠네 사무당과대 제금서 전부를 세야다 게 전부지 때려다 군 남이들 개발다 하고 있나 되니 조슈레기로와 아니 파기 견통사들 견도 통이나 딜런 도래하게 탑시 타나 충사지나 간지 타마베 깔에 가보지고 적어주는 유백원 지기로와 배다 가서 코로나인데 인다 시츄에이션 민다미다 여 인자 그 강알지 테니 적어주는 유백원 있잖아 녀바다 충무여와 다 뒤에서 시고하다 배 미스밖에 쳐버려
라서 드네 디 콘조기
지난 랭이 자두가라 배작하시나 랭이 자두가라
콘조기
군섭 세계도 돈담 군섭 덴발라 장주기 셈자야다 돈담 덴발라 이니 동이 자야한테 용거래스
라서
가르스나 곧 장주기 셈데 다 수승 냠는잖아 다 몸매배 대화 되기어와 대비 잡아와 여제대 가서 낭제대 장주기 셈레데 라고 말와 와다 저자 가서 낭줄라 니 낭줄이 연대간라 니 요래 머리 비켄기 왕기 중네 리피 제바잖아 매차로야 그래서 그가 견전됐다 리피 지삼 리피 제바제시 그 매차요나 이 견전래 지삼 리피 제바제 예fen 처음에 애니베 제바제대 냠는지데 뭐 공펠도 누구야나 낭술도 저도 두바지나 때 양 또서 냠니 제과에 차고래
And so in some text, when we're speaking about relative truth and ultimate truth, in the way that some assert that this is connected with a relative bodhicitta or an ultimate bodhicitta. And in the relative bodhicitta, so in the way that they're working with these two truths, in the relative truth, one works on the relative bodhicitta to further and further increase it, really, that it can be increased in such an extensive way that it brings one just unbelievable peace and happiness. That it brings a great peace and happiness. It's very blissful and very joyful, this relative bodhicitta. And when they speak about ultimate bodhicitta, then the ultimate bodhicitta is emptiness. This ultimate truth is emptiness. Ultimate bodhicitta is emptiness. So when we usually speak about bodhicitta, we don't speak about it in this way, the practice of bodhicitta, but there are some that do divide bodhicitta in these two ways, relative and ultimate. But when it comes to analytical meditation or self-reflection, really analyzing things, really looking into them, if we know, for example, that a certain quality has not yet arisen, for us, that we haven't yet achieved something, we will be inspired because we know that there is a desired result to be achieved, and we're not there yet. We haven't realized it yet, but we will be, this will actually spur us on to really wish to do that, to really wish to work very hard to get to that point. And up until now, we know that we are in samsara. We are in a cyclic existence that presents us with many situations where we then trip up and we create many faults and many misdeeds and missteps and wrongdoings, and we're kind of bound to this situation. And so therefore we understand this and are motivated to work very, very hard to get out of this situation. And so the mind of bodhicitta, there is no limit. The mind of bodhicitta can be developed to such a potential that there is really no end to that. And what we understand as a way to get to our desired final result is we just understand that the way things are for us now, they appear to us because of the condition of ignorance. We are seeing things through the basis of ignorance. And we should know that we can use logic and reasoning and analysis to free ourselves from the misperception through ignorance. And we can understand that we're in a faulty situation right now. We're not in the preferred situation right now. We are in a faulty situation right now, but there are systematically methods for us to work with this and through this.
Yeah. That ruta chega la to seja. Ruta kan mas jibjudo cheda. Oh, tupa zingire do.
Lasso. Tene triwa chilan.
Tupa zimba karma nishunu.
Oh, lasso.
Ta diga zamjana roa.
Lasso.
Tape ringi singi de peke chimborita. Di tone samdana te susule. Ani nangzul de tadu yena yang loton tunji tang. Ani meg loton mi tunji ni kebran jet tuya 하고 와도 뺏게 침버리. 다 직디 하고 얘나더니 삼단스리더니 로든튼디야 공도야. 로드미드 잡아채리 들고 견체로 도나 깔래깔래라 곧 타승해야지 저도그러. 어떻게 뺏게 침버리. 다 되기디 양내양도 삼단과 예주교 말아 간지 삼단과래.
And so we'll stop the teachings there for today. And what Geshe-la says he would like to leave you with is an understanding of the definition of the two truths. How are they different? What does relative truth mean? What does ultimate truth mean? What is the discrepancy between the way things appear and the way things really are? And so he would like his advice is for you to understand the meaning of that, understand the meaning of what is a relative truth and what is the ultimate truth and what makes them so. Then thinking about that more, have the meaning of that become clearer and clearer. So rather than, just systematically meditating on it, he really wants you to think that through until the the meaning just becomes very, very clear of what these two truths are, how they differ.
Yeah. Yes.
And now, does anyone have a question?
I could ask a question, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So one of the so we're talking about the unreality of objects, but also there is an emptiness of self, right? So it's not just the object, it's also the subject that's empty of inherent existence, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, that is not the same thing, or that self that is empty is not the same thing as the intellect, correct? And we need to understand, and also as a corollary, we need to understand what that thing is that we're negating, yes?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the thing that you're negating, meaning the engagement of the intellect?
Right, it's not the intellect that we end up negating when we negate the self, it's some
okay.
other
Yep.
thing.
Mm-hmm. Ani geshe the mang chewa ngato di deni gi korla ani kechechepe kapsu dere ngato di yul gi korla ani yul demba madrupa. Ani yang the chirgi dak me dang gangzaki dak me ni yorwa. Dele yang ani gangzaki dak me Europe kapsu ani tanda kedang di milam chepe tone di lo yi tope chene di gangzak dang lo chikpa mare gangzak
Gangzak dame lo sidigala shepa kogorwa. Ta gangzak dame da chiki dame ni gajigoni kebari omare uma tangiru lujena. Gangzak dame sidigala kiji tan kebar chada gangzak dame da chiki dame de. Ji gangzak dembar meba de gangzak dame re. Punso dembar meba de chiki dame re. Punso pumbola soba. Sonde na chuyoro chujen jemba yongoro. Pumbola soba te ta ganza sidigala karza daji pumbo jiam ngala tape ngajila ganza sigoro. Tenda wa de ni ganza pe ngaso ganza tan ganza dame rabashi thara ni yore. Ganza sidigala si kanji nga se rangkhawa chin jenya jidwa o tenda wa de mel lagor ta nga de be wang yurba bota bu jol ta bu tendi ji nga zo lo le chergor tena ji yo mare
laso
jaza tena ji me to badala kanza ga dame basi gore ani punso dembar me baton na chigi dame lagora kanza ga chigi dame chimachi kanza ga dame chimachi jin to bala punso dembar me bato ugora ta chigi dame mato ba kanza ga dame chimachi jin to pe kabu ore
laso di tampo de chigi dame ba dukore
kanza ga dame chimachi jin to bala chigi dame to ugora ko gaji ko ni khepare mare de tonji ko ni khepar cha son re kanza ga dame te chigi dame te
laso dene lo yamena yigi to ne dene di samlo tangya ki nupa
samlo gaja kaya de chipa cha de ro
laso dene
gaja dendup kaya le chikpa chikya ne niga ta chujingi karsa ore chujingi khepar cha ore
lodi
ma kanza dame de chugi dame de chujingo ni khepar cha ma do gaji ko ni khepar cha go mare uma thangyu lula lola ta khepar yongro kanza dame to na chugi dame to goye yo marwa
라소.
가지 야 냠nem바데서 당보 간사가 다음에 또 되니 지니 간사 다음에 찌마 지진 답에 용수서 버지 약고시 또 발라 니 치기 다음에 찌마 지진 마다나 간사가 다음에 또 두마리 숭숭 거래
라소.
여름 무치도 뭐가 여름 무치 엄마 동튼 처모서 되어래 yer muchizmane tilone ni te kala kansa ka dame kans tesarna pumbu ne rajin kansa ne rajin me pause de si de thoda pe ningla chapsha gyap sons
Okay, laso yanker tsikti sumuche.
tesarna kansa ne rajin me pause de si jiore
Tej
tesarna
tetarna.
kansa ne rajin me pause de si jiora te ti de be jalo na yo de kala ningla chapsha gyap sons
Oh, laso.
and did
Re.
masing der mindu samsamji tongsanji lesonde tig kansa ga dame rapa to ma do thamut to min jima ji to mindu se sungdo
Re.
tadung kardan jima ji ma do be kende phumbo ani be tarum dendu demper nawa de legidu sungdo Chazan lola kepardoa lola ani kaza dame to be loda chugi dame to be lola kepardoa
And so, actually, no, these two things are not the same. That we are negating when we look at, so we have the emptiness of phenomena and the emptiness of the person or the individual. And so when we talk about, did I say, maybe I said the Tibetan word, I meant to say mind. So the mind and that is negated with the emptiness of the individual are not the same. So, or intellect. So here the intellect is like this knowing, so we're using the mind, that which knows, like that which has the process of knowing. But when when you talk about, so there's the understanding of the wisdom of the emptiness of phenomena or selflessness of phenomena and the selflessness of the person or individual. When it comes to the prasangika madhyamakans or middle way of prasangika, there's actually no difference. They don't make discrepancies. For them, it's the same. But
가지고니 개발해요 말이스
that which
동시
is
추진고니 개발해요 레스
that which is negated, there's no difference.
오 동시 추진고니 개발해요 가르잖아 지나 풍부 또 간사 추기 다음에 또 사대 풍부 차고를 지대 간사 차고로 와
However, what there is a difference in is that which they are positing this this assertion on, be it the like the physical aggregates and form and so forth. So there's one that's like physical, and like like the emptiness of phenomena. So then there's physical, and then with the emptiness within the individual, then it's this basis of the individual. And so when we are negating the existence of a self, of the individual, what we, in our ordinary tendencies, what we do is we have this sense of I is rooted in or based in this aggregate form. So there is a sense of I that comes with having these physical aggregates. And there is both the coarse sense of this and then the subtle sense of this. So, but basically we have this aggregate body of form, and upon that basis, we then project an I, a me. There's a sense of an independent, autonomous individual that goes along with this aggregate form. And that's what is being negated, that there is no independent, autonomous I. There is no self. And that's the emptiness of the individual. And then there's the emptiness of phenomena, again, that we project upon things that have an identity that we project upon things that have form. And it's said that that in order to be able to realize the emptiness of self, of oneself, of the individual, the sense of an I, that one must first come to terms with phenomena and realizing the emptiness in phenomena. It is said that the emptiness in phenomena must first be realized in order for one to get to that point in understanding the lack of any real identity of self. And so His Holiness the Dalai Lama, so we said there's those subtle, in order to really realize the selflessness of the individual or realize your own emptiness of self, that there's coarse and subtle. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama, when teaching, speaks about this experience that he had. And he was reading from one of Jetsun Kapa's texts. And he was reading these words that says, Gondak, DJ Rinpoche Git Sik Yankir Detarna Gangsak
델타나 간산에 하심해 봐고.
Gangshimebo.
이거는 팀만 보지야 다 누구면 봐.
Yeah, so it's a long stanza, but in the end, it says, through seeing this, one sees that oneself, the individual, does not exist. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama says that he was reading this this part in the text, and it was almost like a lightning strike came and hit him. He felt like he had been struck in his heart. And this became a very meaningful, like all of a sudden he had a feeling about, I don't exist. And so he said, however, he didn't understand, like he hadn't really understood the full, like he had a feeling, but he didn't understand the fullness of everything around it. So he had a course, he had an experience that cut through the coarse sense of self, but not the subtle sense of self. Because he still said he felt some connection to his aggregate form. So this shows that it hadn't cut through both the coarse and the subtle. But in end, to answer your question, so this intellect or this subject, this intellect that is perceiving objects is not the same as this sense of a self.
간사가 다음에 터무도 발라 주기 다음에 또 봉은도 누구고 하래 다간제 때래 간사 다음에 라바도 발라 구고 말해 주기 다음에 또 봉은도 누구고 말해.
And so in order to realize the selflessness of the person, then one must have a direct realization of emptiness in phenomena. However, it doesn't go the other way around. You don't have to have a realization of lack of self in order to recognize lack of phenomena.
The word that I had was jiva. For the sense of self, Jiva.
That's Sanskrit. I'm not sure, Pali. I'm not familiar with that word.
Okay.
Can you give it to me in a sentence? Jiva. I can look up the equivalent.
It is interesting to note that the jiva, or limited individual being in Vedanta, is often said to be the size of the thumb and located in the heart.
Huh. I wonder if this is like the Samaya being, Dam Sikpa, I could look up what Genla, Geshala, Jiva, Ani Leksha Kela Jiva Gidonda Kirang Kingi Yana. I will look up and see what jiva means. I'm having a sense that what it means, like a thumb-sized in the heart.
Like a moving nexus of awareness, like, okay, I'm thinking about this spot and it's that big, and you know what I'm saying? Like, but
Yeah,
I think
yeah, yeah.
I think it's the Hindu, a Brahmanic term as opposed to necessarily a Buddhist term, but
Yeah, I could see the Sanskrit and see what the equivalent might be. I know in some of the practice texts, there's like a samaya being that's visualized at the heart center. That's usually a thumb joint size, but that's in connection with sadhana practice. I'm not sure. If you check.
When I read it, when I read it, I imagined it just kind of as a moving awareness.
Okay. Yeah, I would have to find out what jiva means, and then we could find out what context it has to do with self or low or intellect.
There might be a glossary.
Mm-hmm. While William is looking, does anyone else have a question? I'll also look on internet.
Jiva.
Okay, jiva is a living being or entity imbued with a life force. The word itself originates from Sanskrit root verb jiv, which translates to breathe or live. It's a living being or entity imbued with a life force. What is the difference between jiva and atman? So jiva is individual consciousness.
He has as limited individual being as a
the ego identified self that limits itself to a mortal frame. And Atman is supreme divine consciousness. So jiva la
Hindu ki jeans re.
re. Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know. I might be comparing apples to oranges.
Te tatan dege mari Hindu atma se du galas karso kansa ga date shigora date.
So like that sense of individual, like that, like the self is what they call, like within Hinduism, that Atman.
Atma dan sorun chikpa chikyar ta. Kirshen ge sor se ya jido.
Sok.
Oh. Sol lagdo kirshen ge.
Really?
Te dan atma se yangi chik si khagare ma to tonta chikpa chikyar.
Hola, so yanayang di takpar deken re.
Oh, tapar degen re. Te dire Hindu ge sol de kandesh gugwara atma.
Sol yamena sol sana di injitsik yamena ani perketsik.
Ma sol mare sol de
Sol. Yeah.
Kirshen gung lagdo.
Re.
Te dan atma se yin tonta chipare.
Okay.
Chamepi chipu zevgi ribu miji pe tapa ze tapan de gore.
Okay.
Chayo mare chipu re lagra. Jesiyo mares jesiyo pe rilbu res. Ani miji jiya yo mare ko tapa re lagore. Te kansa ga dame rapa re te nape chena. Kansa ga da rapa chi.
So the soul Atman, so I know we're not talking about jiva now, but Atman, which I don't know in Tibetan if it has an equivalent word, but Atman is what within the Hindu-gi cholo.
Nangpe chena pungpo le tenshin beda tere ta. Atma zene pungpo le tenshin beda. Pungpo le jende. Pungpo zende kinji jiga orwa. Ko mea chadu orwa. Tash shepa thamu de ja ma shudi gala koza atma zade takpa ji shepa de takpa inde kin de ta
The Hindu-gi cholo.
Hindu atma zane otre
So
chechu sumden ji guware minji pe tapa chame pe chipun ze giril buzade.
Okay. Chame tang.
Chame pe chikpu. Minji pe tapa.
So within, so this Atman is what the Hindu, so it's very similar to soul, our understanding of Christians' understanding of a soul. So, right, we are a physical and mental, beings, and the physical body dies, but there is still something left. There's a soul. However, they believe this soul is permanent and that it is singular, so is partless, and singular and permanent. And so this is something that is also like this coarse identity, this coarse self that we were talking. So we had the coarse and subtle. And so this is the this Gondakishila di Atman kongi triwa dang dralwa yana. Palcherio mane dralwa.
Triwa da Atmadam dewaji yobezon shigido. Marebe.
Di truck. Lasso. Di jiva dang Atman chikpare. Di
jiva da Atma chikpa ine tatare. Atma singideo.
Chikpamare.
Chikpamare. Ale.
Chikpamare. Yeah, chikpamare.
Chikpamena mishide.
So jiva and Atman are not, according to my little bit on internet, they're not the same. But anyways, Atman, that more, what I'm saying here, more expansive, inclusive consciousness, that is again, it is separate from the aggregates, and it is singular and permanent.
Yeah, that true.
Everyone's probably getting very sore knees. It's already 6.
Yeah, that.
Okay, so shall we do dedication? Janet, Janice, would you like to do?
Josem Rimboche, Maki Pana, Kingurchi, Kawa Nyamba, Mebaya, Kone Kondo Pewar. Kari Rave, Kurvi Jingante, Penda Deva, Malinju, and Cherezi, Tenzin Jape City, Porto, Tenguruchi, Jambal Powe, Chintara Kimbatan, Kundo Zampo, Teante. Tada kunje jizo da lochir gwewande da tamche ratung tu sumche pe kyawata no kanla chotonga patana da jenge tsawandi zambo chichir ratung wareki.
Bodhichitta, the excellent and precious mind, where it is unborn, may it arise. Where it is born, may it not decline, but ever increase higher and higher. In the land encircled by snow-white mountains, the source of all happiness and benefit flows in your person, Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso. Remain until samsara ends. Just as the Bodhisattva Manjushri attained omniscience and Samantabhadra too, so now I dedicate these merits to train and follow in their footsteps. As all the victorious Buddhas of the past, present, and future praise dedication as supreme, so now I too dedicate these sources of my merit for all beings to perfect good actions.